A lot of people complain, and rightly so, about really bad things going on in the world. And they'll usually say it just doesn't make sense. They're like trying to figure out why would people be doing these things that seem to just be harming people and not being productive whatsoever. A key example being, why is almost everything in our society poisonous? Like, it doesn't need to be so, but it's been made so. Like, why are toxins added to so-called medicine? Why are the so-called medicines just pretty much purely toxic themselves? Or, why are there so many poisonous substances added to the food supply? Why is there poisons left in the water? Why are poisons sprayed on all over our food? There's initial answers to questions like these, like, well, the pesticides are necessary to keep away the pests, right? Because otherwise the crops would be largely destroyed. And if you just look at it on a surface level like that, it's really missing the big picture. Again, it's not just in one area of our life, it's almost everything. It's like, why are our bedding materials, pillows, sprayed with this toxic fire retardant? Of course, the surface level answer is, well, it's to keep you safe, right? It's to prevent the fire, right? Well, okay, do we really need to have like a carcinogenic, uh, a carcinogen, like sprayed on our pillows and so on? Um, why is the new car smell actually toxic, right? Like, why is so many of the products that we handle uh, toxic? Why is our um, kitchen utensils and pans coated in toxins? Does it have to be that way, just across the board? There's really no other way to do these things? Or, some might say, oh, well, it's cost prohibitive. And again, that's very surface level. Like, if you're just going to think, well, there's these explanations that seem to make some sense, but are really just giving an excuse to those that are putting this out there. So, an alternate way of viewing the situation is that this isn't all just accidental, and that there are actually people at the top of these institutions that make these calls that then get, you know, um, these orders, so to speak, or these agendas or protocols. Like, why is hospital birth protocols made to be so harmful and traumatic to the baby? Like, is that at all necessary? Of course not. Um, it just goes on and on. Why, why are all these extremely harmful things going on? Why are they trying to disarm nonviolent people? Like, that doesn't actually make sense. But all of this does make sense if you consider that the people at the top of these institutions are malevolent, are actually not only uncaring, but uh, maliciously evil. So, this would actually make sense of a lot of the things that we say don't make sense, right? If you actually had like really evil people, like, what would they be intent on doing? They would just want to harm people just to harm people, right? There's no good explanation, right? We keep looking for a rationale for like why is all of this, unnecessary harm being done? Why is all of this totalitarianism going on? Like, is it just um, seeking more power by disempowering everyone else? Well, that's certainly part of it, but if someone is purely evil, that means that they're purely abusive. And so, in order to carry out abuse on a consistent basis, you need to control whoever it is that you're abusing. But the control isn't actually the main motivation, right? The control is for the purpose of abuse. And so I don't think most people take that next step because it just seems too crazy. It's like, well, how could they be so corrupted that they actually seem to enjoy harming people? So it's a tough pill to swallow, I suppose, but it really does make more sense of everything that we observe in the world, and um, it is actually biblical too. And I rarely use the term biblical because I don't believe that the current compilation of scrolls, letters, and books that comprise the modern Bible is perfect or the inerrant Word of God at all. Um, but there is wisdom still contained in there, even though the lying pen of the scribes have really worked it over and eliminated and you know eliminated truth and added falsehood uh, to a very large degree. But I don't want to go off on a that's a whole separate talk in itself. I recommend just looking into the history of the Bible, like who were the people that decided to pick certain gospels and reject others, and why were the letters of Paul later uh, called scripture when they initially were not considered as such, and so on and so forth. Mistranslations and changing of the changing of the wording and so on. Lots of editing. My point being that just concerning the story of Jesus being the devil attempting to tempt Jesus in the desert, he offered him all the kingdoms of the world, right? So this logically means that Satan has those in his possession to offer, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be, there could be no temptation, right? Because he couldn't offer them in the first place. Um, and this idea of the evil one being the ruler of this world, is very much um, stated stated plainly in in the Bible and elsewhere. But I think even Christians and others who may read texts that state that, I don't think they really take it that seriously. Or if they do take it seriously, they might just think it's somehow just operating on like a spiritual level and not thinking of it in much more of a, thinking much more on the material side. Like, what does that mean? Just in very practical, like everyday life. Well, it means the institutions. It means all of these major institutions of power that have a chain of command. Because as you go up the chain of command, it becomes a smaller and smaller group of people. And you'll find that the orders and commands coming from the very top are what actually drive all of this um, mass poisoning and mass harm. It's not people at the bottom coming up with these ideas. or making these practices the norm, right? Is people at the top pushing it down, right? Because they have all of the wealth and control of these institutions, so they make the rules. And if you don't play by the rules, well, then they just fire you, right? They just eliminate you from your position, and so they just keep people in that comply. And if people stop complying, like with, for example, doctors in recent years who were calling out all the injuries and deaths happening from the so-called medicine, they're a limit. They can lose their license, right? If you don't go by the protocol, right? Well, lose your license, you lose your medical license, right? Well, who makes the standards for, what counts as disqualification? Well, it's people. It's not the doctors, right? It's further up the administrative ladder, right? And you go up further and further, and then you get to the people actually calling the shots. So, um, I just wanted to, make this brief talk to um, get through the perception, get through the perspective, I should say, excuse me, that all of this makes a whole lot more sense once you take into consideration, this wild conspiracy theory. People would immediately think, well, that just sounds ridiculous. But the reason they probably think it sounds ridiculous is because they think, well, most people aren't like that. And that's true. But you have to recognize, well, the fact that most people aren't like extremely evil doesn't make this theory um, impossible to be true, because the theory isn't talking about most people, it's talking about the very few, right? So you shouldn't um, neglect the possibility. You shouldn't close your mind to the possibility that there are a few people that are very evil, and that they also happen to be the very few that are at the top of the power structure, at the top of the global social systems, in all of these institutions, which, of course, include the political, the medical establishment, education, all the universities and state schools. Um, this should be, corporate world too, of course. So again, you should be able to recognize just the plain fact that the people that really run these institutions at the very top are very few, right? So, and then it shouldn't be too strange of a possibility to consider, like, well, maybe these very few at the top aren't very uh, good people. Maybe they're not actually interested in helping humanity at all. Maybe they actually enjoy just doing harm. So, like, again, this might just seem totally out there. Like, I had a gentleman say to me, well, I don't understand why they'd want to make everyone sick, because if the population is sick, they're going to be less productive, and so, that doesn't help the economy, right? So he's thinking about it just from like this. Um, that's a very reasonable way to think, but I'm just saying it's not open to the possibility of, well, maybe that's not actually their main interest, which is just to see like a healthy, thriving economic society. Maybe there are a few people that still actually practice, or that are still members of what is known as a death cult, where they actually enjoy harming people, right? Like, if you look in history, there would be these crazy, evil people that would um, murder babies, to um, supposedly, please their god or whatever. So they're just doing pure evil, um, not for any economic interest. Not There's no like practical or productive anything. It's just It's just evil for the sake of evil because they think, oh well, this is uh, pleasing to their God, or it's just what they're, what the devil wants them to do, kind of thing. And they got whatever contract or whatever with the devil going. So when you consider that the people at the very top might actually be participating in something like this, then oh well, why would they want to, cause so much injury and harm totally unnecessarily? Why would they want to poison humanity? Well, if they're just doing it because they they were following orders from the devil and they just want to do what he says for whatever reason, or they actually just get enjoyment out of seeing mass destruction. Think about like the idea of a demon. Like, what does a demon enjoy? It just enjoys harming people. There's no rationale. If you ask, you're trying to figure out, well, why is a demon demonic? Like, why does a demon do evil stuff all the time? Why is a demon constantly trying to sabotage and people's lives and hurt them? Well, it's because they're insanely evil. Like it's not anything more or less than that. So when you recognize there's this like insane evil in operation in the world, then that craziness, the reality of that craziness actually makes sense of what we're seeing in the world rather than trying to keep um, rationalize and make excuses for them. And it's also important because then we can actually progress out of this, downward spiral into just, a more and more toxic world where just more and more people have cancer and autism and all these other debilitating diseases. Like the amount of people that get cancer and children getting autism and various other diseases is just going, you know, exponentially high now. I mean, the whole world is just becoming uh, completely toxic and damaged. And to think that this is all just accidental, I think is naive. So yeah, just something to open your mind to the possibility of, and then the solution being disconnection from all these systems and no longer believing that they're actually here to serve us. And even though the people at the bottom that are in them, employed by them, might have good intentions, they all basically have their hands tied and have to follow the agenda. Otherwise, they'll get kicked out. So, um, recognizing that all these institutions are just pushing evil, self sabotage, destruction, they're just going against God's original design and plan for humanity, making the world more hellish rather than heavenly. So, going against the mission of the Messiah, to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, which is what we should be collaborating with him toward as the goal. And knowing your enemy in the first place, knowing that you are actually um, facing this evil on a grand scale, on a huge global level that's pervasive through all these institutions, um, then you can stop like literally sacrificing your children to these evil people by letting them get indoctrinated by them and poisoned by them and all the rest, and seeking to decentralize and privatize and regain personal sovereignty so we can form strong voluntary communities based on the non-aggression principle and no longer be subject to the abuse of this satanic death cult. And just to recap and add a few more details to demystify this as best as I can in a short talk. What I'm talking about are particular institutions that make up, much of our social life experience because of the power and influence and control that they have in our society. So again, the whole political establishment that includes all the political parties, just politics altogether, um, state education and university schooling, right? Academia, that's a huge institution that has a hierarchy of controllers, right? The medical establishment, again, is most certainly a hierarchy. This isn't like really that hard to grasp or understand what I'm saying. It's not like a theory. If you, well, just look at what happened these past few years, right? They were all following the same protocol, right? You didn't have like individual hospitals, doing different protocols, right? They were all following the same agenda, right? So where was that agenda coming from? Obviously from a centralized power, right? Higher up in the chain of command, right? They're all subject to a higher authority, quote unquote, right? They're all taking orders from someone higher in rank, right? Higher in the chain of command. And that's why they were all doing the same thing. That's why they were all pushing forth the same policies, right? That's why the hospital birth protocol is the same in all mainstream hospitals. And that's why they make natural birth, they can make it out to be almost criminal or actually criminal. Same with like natural treatments. If a doctor were to prescribe a natural treatment for cancer, they would lose their license, right? Because the only approved treatment, right, is chemotherapy and radiation, right? Chemotherapy being uh, a poison, you know, injected into the body, and then radiation, right? So poison and radiation to cure cancer, yet cancer is caused by carcinogens, aka poisons, and radiation. Okay, does that make sense? Well, if I say it does not make sense, then that would be medical misinformation, right? So just leave it for you to investigate, right? Of course, ask your, how does the disclaimer always have to go? Ask your, licensed medical professional, this is not medical advice. So the medical establishment is definitely one of the institutions, along with politics, along with education, miseducation or indoctrination, more like it. And then, of course, the religious establishment, right? Which is, as I was talking about with the uh, tampering and, just purposeful collection of writings by the establishment church, that make up what we know of as the Bible, but establishment religion in general, right? Again, do you think all your churches are like just independent? Or do they actually have to abide by certain protocols and policies and, you know, um, dogma, right? And if they don't, then guess what happens? They lose their funding, right? They lose their 501c3 nonprofit status, right? So they're all under control by someone higher up in the chain of command, right? This is not, mystical woo-woo, whatever. It's just very straightforward. Like they are taking orders, right? They're not independent. Right? That's what makes them part of the establishment institution, the pyramidal system, Satan's system. And I had just mentioned radiation, and that's another one that is a huge part of actually the mass poisoning. It's instead of a chemical poisoning, it's like a radioactive poisoning or damage being done to humanity. The amount of, the electromagnetic pollution or EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies that we're exposed to, is just off the chart. Our ancestors weren't experiencing any of these coming from these modern technologies whatsoever. And this is just I'm just talking about it to start with, what you're just bombarded with, even if you're not even using the technology, right? If you're just out and about, like school children now, all the schools have Wi-Fi. And even though when they installed the Wi-Fi for the first time and the kids were having bad reactions and headaches and all, it all got ignored for the most part, and anyone that resisted was, called crazy or um, just ignored until they decided to, remove their child from the school. And so all you had left were parents that were obedient, and non-resisting. So yeah, all the Wi-Fi, of course, cell phones, uh, and other sources of electromagnetic radiation, um, like smart meters, they're called. The electric meters put on homes that irradiate at extremely high levels, and baby monitors, and now with more and more appliances and technologies becoming so-called smart or Wi-Fi capable, it's just adding to the already high level of radiation exposure. And this is all supposed to be perfectly safe, right? Like cell phones, even though in the fine print they say you shouldn't actually hold this within so many inches. Well, obviously, if you're holding the phone, or pressing up against your head, that's zero distance, and so um, how can that be safe? So yeah, I mean, this is again just coincidental that like all the technology, for the most part, that we're being exposed to, and that's being normalized, just happens to be health damaging. Like, why is everything that's being normalized health damaging? Is that really, that's just the way it has to be? That's the only cost effective way to have a society? It's just really naive again. Um, Also, like with what they do to infants, and even before they're born, right, with the ultrasound that's supposed to be perfectly safe, right? And of course, given in the name of safety for the baby. But that's been found to be, if you do research on that, you will find some scientists and doctors saying, well, they don't actually believe it's safe, and particularly it can be harmful to the reproductive system of the baby in utero. So, but that's just normalized, right? Oh, gotta get your ultrasound, gotta make sure the baby's doing well. And then afterwards, oh, gotta get that vitamin K shot, um, mixed with whatever else, toxic ingredients, and gotta clamp that umbilical cord right away, even though the baby's still utilizing it, and gotta take the baby away from the mother and put him on this cold metal scale, and so on and so forth. It's just insanity to think that like all of these clearly harmful practices that have been made, that have been standardized by the people at the upper echelons of the system, right? Again, these are not grassroots ideas. They're all coming from people at the top of the chain of command. To think that this is all just coincidentally harmful is extremely naive. Some people hypothesize, well, it's a depopulation agenda, and I think that's getting closer to the truth. Um, but again, it's still looking at it more in just kind of like a practical level, like as if that had some practical sense to it, uh, in someone's mind anyway, rather than accepting the possibility that there are people that are just pure evil, and that they're just set on destroying humanity because they hate humanity, because they hate God's creation. Like that should be considered as a possibility to explain why there's so much poisoning of the population, radiating the population, miseducating, disempowering the population. And a large pathway for that, of course, is what's known as entertainment. Right? So the entertainment industry, part of the corporate establishment, but in particular, used for programming. And again, parents just trust whoever's putting together these, children's programs and TV shows and movies. Oh, most people are good people, so I'll just figure that whoever made this, most people are decent people. So I'll just figure whoever, called the shots on this television program or movie, they were good people too. Most people are good people, so I'll just figure this ultrasound is safe. I'll just figure the vaccine is safe. I'll just figure, all things are, the cell phone is fine, and I don't have to worry about my child being like, um, if it's a boy being um, feminized, or if it's a girl then being masculinized, again going against God's design to sabotage and disrupt society and undermine his original harmonious plan for humanity. It's basically just like sheep being led to the slaughter kind of thing. People just trust that, oh yeah, everything coming down from these institutions is probably okay because most people aren't like spending their time trying to psychologically and physically harm others. Most people are just trying to have a good life. They're not interested in wasting their time, spending a good portion of their time and energy on like, how can I hurt as many people as possible? That's just not the mindset of most people. And so they think, well, since, and they recognize, well, that's not my mindset. I don't think, most, my friends and neighbors, I don't think that's what they're preoccupied with. I think they're more interested in having a good time, and having a good life and kind of minding their own business for the most part. Um, and so then they assume, well, then everyone is like that, right? Well, that's just not the case. Everyone is not like that. Most people are, but not everyone. And so the problem with having a society that is filled with these institutions is that it gives the illusion of like, oh, well, this is just some kind of like, gathering of minds of most people and like a grassroots kind of building of social establishments or institutions and structures, but that's not how it works. It's top down. These institutions are created from the top and then disseminated to the majority. They're not made from the down, from everyday people. Everyday people are assimilated into them, um, mainly through monetary dependency. And so the main insight to grasp is that there is a chain of command and that the people at the very top are evil. And so that's why the agendas and policies and protocols and practices are so ridiculously harmful. So I hope I explained this well enough for you to get this perspective on why the world is so insanely evil, right? Make good sense of why things are so insanely evil. All right, thanks for listening.